Welcome back again. We're going to have another small audio lecture, not lecture, audio conversation from me about John Locke. Now, John Locke is classified as an empiricist philosopher. And an empiricist philosopher is someone who subscribes to the belief that knowledge comes from experience, or said a different way, all knowledge comes from experience, except for certain logical truths and principles of mathematics. And when I say experience, it's not to be understood simply as a memory recall. That would be Plato. It really does mean a physical data transmission from the outside world into us, into our physical bodies. When I say physical transmission, John Locke lived at the time when they had just recently invented the microscope, and they were able to see small particles of matter below a 20/20 vision. In our time period, that seems like something passé. But at that point in time, what a phenomenon that was to see something that you couldn't see with normal vision. And that helped John Locke theorize a belief that our bodies are constructed in such a way that they represent a vehicle for the outside world to come in this respect. Sunlight, waves of light come into our eyeball, sound into our ears, aromas through our nose, etc. And this image of the outside world coming inside literally represents sense data and will present us with a brand new model of the mind, which John Locke will call tabula rasa. But before John Locke can give us a concept of tabula rasa, which is discussed in our textbook, I'm not sure if I'll spend much time on that though, I do want to present some arguments against innate ideas, because John Locke, with his theories, has presented some interesting and common sense logic. Instead of looking for certainty, an empiricist philosopher looks for reasonable inference, reasonable explanations, but not really absolute certainty. We might ask ourselves, why not absolute certainty? Well, if we look around outside of us, as I made note before about the physical world, it does change. And the very fact that the physical world of matter changes, that means the sense data also changes. Not just our visual perception of it. Of course it's going to change, because why? The physical world is changing, right? So if the outside world is the source of our knowledge, and if it's changing, then the most we can hope for is a reasonable, a pretty high degree of accountability, but we cannot expect absolute certainty. In fact, this is evidenced by empirical data, sometimes in the form of research, statistical analysis, other types of disciplines which go out and look at behavioral models of people. And then they make their thesis, and then they make their studies, and they come to a conclusion. And then later on, someone makes another discovery based upon a new observation. And so it goes. Now, this discussion of observation is a big deal, because when you are an empirical philosopher back in the days of John Locke, and you want to disprove a theory that says we have innate ideas, and in particular, if the innate ideas are not physical pieces of matter, they're like invisible from a different realm called the realm of being. Well, you can see that if you're a science follower, you can't really say that you discovered the speed of light or gravity by innate ideas, because science depends upon several basic fundamentals: observation of physical matter, experimentation of physical matter, and predictability of physical matter. Those three are key to understand physical science. So, how can we, if we're John Locke, try to go against Plato, who has a theory called innate ideas? Well, in the textbook on page 214 and 215, there are some headings: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, bordered by the blue lines. And he does consider the possibility of there being only one innate idea. Let's be clear, John Locke does not believe we have innate ideas. He wants to pretend that we do have it, and then if we do have something inside of us, then by discussing physical behavior, you can tell if someone has that idea inside of them. Let me be clear again. Normally, we look at physical behavior of how people behave, and we make an inference, a reasonable inference, not absolute certainty. We don't need that for empirical data, but a pretty reasonable inference to be pretty close to be accountably correct. And we infer from the outside behavior what is in someone's mind or what is not in someone's mind, what they're thinking about right now or what they're not thinking about right now. I think on a really simplistic level, we can ascertain this if you were in some kind of a family get together and maybe you were cooking some food for somebody and you watch them sort of just play with the food but not eat much of it. That physical behavior would lead to an inference such that you would say, I guess they're not hungry right now or they don't like my food, or maybe both, right? And so you're, by the physical behavior, you're making inference about something going on inside of somebody. Well, that same kind of technique is what John Locke is going to use to try and go against Plato. And so now I'll begin by a little bit more detail. I bring this up into the posted lecture, but let's see if I can sort of prep you for it with this audio. Let us pretend that there's somebody named Zelda, okay? And I say, hey, Zelda, this is a question, this is a prompt under Plato's theory. Hey, Zelda, do you think you and me can stand in the same place at the exact same time in the exact same way? Give her a moment to think about the question. And supposing now she says no. I hope she says no. And if she says no, then I immediately can infer that she understands what a contradiction is, that it's a physical impossibility to do what I just asked. But if on the contrary she said yes, that is possible, then I would immediately infer that she does not know what a contradiction is, because it's just physically impossible to do and mentally impossible to even conceive of it at the exact same time. So if we suppose Plato is correct, he says we have ideas of beauty, love, justice. But John Locke is concerned about supposing that of all the ideas that Plato claims we're supposed to have, he wants to say, what would be the first and most important idea that anyone would uncover in the realm of becoming? What would it be? Would it be love or beauty or justice? And that doesn't make any sense to John Locke. No matter what nationality you are, what's the first idea which would be of most practical value for you to uncover? Love, beauty, or justice? Or would it be some abstract concept called contradiction? Sometimes in the old-fashioned way, they would say, what is, right? That's a way of discussing the idea of a contradiction. And why would the idea of a contradiction be the most practical and first idea to uncover? Well, imagine a globe or like a container with a bunch of ideas, right? Well, you would have to have an idea called contradiction to help separate the ideas which are inside there. Maybe you think of it like this. Think of several ping pong balls inside of a fishbowl, one called beauty, love, justice. And they're floating around in there, right? But how do we separate the ideas? Remember, they're invisible. Or if you're like Descartes, the ideas are made out of wood, you wouldn't be able to tell which were awake ideas or sleep ideas. So how would you separate the ideas? There must be another idea, which is more practical than beauty, love, and justice. And that is what John Locke says, reasonably, I think, that it's called the contradiction. And that idea would be the first one to uncover. And how would we know someone uncovered it? Well, by their behavior, by their answers to a question. I just used the example of Zelda. And when she answered yes, I now know she knows what a contradiction is. But if she answered no, then I would infer pretty reasonable that she does not know. Okay, so now the problem is set up a little bit here. And John Locke runs through several positions on page 214 and 215. But settling on number 5, he says, not in the mind naturally imprinted, because not known to children, etc. What is not known to children? It's a very odd thing that we have, according to John Locke, innate ideas, and yet people seem not to be able to find them, not to be able to understand. Well, how am I going to show you this? Well, here goes. Let's imagine now that you are teaching a child the idea of addition. And this could be any kind of grade school at first to begin with, right? 1 plus 1 is 2. And you're using positive reinforcement. Every time he gives a positive answer, he or she gives a positive answer, you give them a cookie, a hug, or whatever. That's positive reinforcement. But you see, after you practice a little while, you ask them again, and they give up some other answer besides the correct one. They say elephant, dog, or 510, or some weird number. And occasionally they give the right answer. Okay? Now, the problem is not just one person here. John Locke would be silly to talk about just one person. That'd be crazy. What we're talking about is all time periods from ancient Greece, Mesopotamia, Egypt, modern day America, all time periods. Just let's look around and ask ourselves, how many people have difficulty just in simple additional problems, making addition problems? Like 2 plus 2 is 4, or whatever the simple mathematical problems are. They have very difficult times doing this. And of course, modern people say, well, whatever the answer modern people are going to say, it supports John Locke. They don't have the idea of a contradiction inside their mind to differentiate the correct answer from the incorrect answers that they've practiced. Again, one more time. You practice with Zeke, say 1 plus 1 is 2, a lot of times over and over. And then maybe ask him on his own now. He says elephant or dog or some weird number. And you want to know what is going on. I don't really care about what's going on. What's important is that that's physical evidence to show that he does not have the idea of a contradiction to help separate the correct answers in his mind versus the incorrect answers. Because he's been doing this incorrect answering several times now after you correct them. He still gets it wrong. And again, we're not just talking about one example. That'd be mistaken. We're discussing many kinds of children, many types of time periods. And if we had any ideas, according to John Locke, it would be pretty obvious that children, not adults, would be making less mistakes on their homework assignments. Let's make it really simple. But they make mistakes. And why? Well, because if they had any ideas, they would be able to figure it out right away. But John Locke's point is, no, they don't seem to have that one important idea called a contradiction to recognize within their selections of options inside their mind what is the right option versus what's the wrong option. They can't seem to figure that one out. That is a way of saying against Plato and also Descartes that there are no such things as innate ideas inside of us. Instead, what John Locke wants to say is that we have to actually learn. Going back to what I said a few minutes ago, that the physical world serves a function of giving us sense data, he has developed an idea called tabula rasa, which I'll just briefly touch on, where the physical world, literally through beams of light, which are photons, stamp an image inside of our mind, something like a camera picture. And when we have enough images from a young age, then we can take those images and compound them and divide them, and then we construct ideas from the starting point called nature, the physical world, through sound waves, through light waves, through odors, etc., gives us what's called sense data, and we are receivers or passive receivers of the sense data. And we're looking only right now at the example of light and images, like a camera, like on your cell phone cameras, comes into our eyeball, and we snap pictures of what are outside of us, and we can now extrapolate from those pictures at an early age and compound ideas, etc. And this model is a model of knowledge, which is a replacement model for Plato. It's an empirical model. So it's a big step in human development to say that now we have to learn, now we have to be taught. So in school, you see that people use PowerPoints, or they use grade school cards or colors or sounds. All of those are techniques to put images inside of us so that we can later compound and divide those images. But there is a small price to pay. Well, it could be big down the line. Is that now we've made a division that the mind is born blank from birth. It's called tabula rasa, means blank slate. So we come out of our moms, our mind does not have any ideas inside of it. We are receivers. And the physical world stamps its data inside of us all the time, every day, nonstop. No matter what age you are, we're receiving data all the time. It doesn't just stop when you're like 20 years old. It continues forever. And we continually get bombarded by sense data all the time, and we compound ideas over and over again. But now the point being is this, that the ideas we have inside of our mind now are partially constructed by the physical sense data world. That is, by the size and the shape and the positions of objects which are independently existing outside of us. And that gives us a degree of reasonableness. Our ideas are pretty accurate because what exists in the physical world for sure, or pretty darn sure, is size and shape. And think of it this way, if there are no people anywhere on this planet anymore, the question now is, would there still be a size and a shape of objects, whatever the words might be? They might be called trees or mountains or rocks or whatever the words that are relevant. But would there still be these ideas called size and shape outside in the physical world, even if mankind did not exist? And for John Locke, of course, they do. And that gives us a degree of reliability that our ideas that are constructed in the mind are connected to the physical world, but yet the abstract derivations we make in the mind are prompted by the physical world. And in this way of explaining, and of course, with this basic rudimentary model, we have many theories of modern education developed from this, which again, basically the outside world coming inside of us, manipulating the outside world by, like I say, PowerPoints or slideshows or whatever people do these days, right? To get you to see images a certain way and then make derivations. What we've done now with John Locke is we've now given a reasonable interpretation of how we get ideas without having to subscribe to a different realm, which doesn't seem to exist for John Locke. And now we have two basic ideas of how intelligence is acquired in our minds. All right, I think that would be enough for the moment here. What I'm concerned about mostly in the published lecture is the critique that John Locke gives against Plato, because it's a very right to the point critique, and the discussion of the tabula rasa for John Locke is broached in the textbook. I think after pages 220 onward, at 220 onward, there's a discussion of what he calls particle transmissions. Physical world transmits particles to us. Something like your cell phones work by cell phone towers. That's particle transmission of electronic transmission of pieces of matter. So light is also pieces of matter. So it's a very interesting theory. And I think with that, that'll be enough for the moment. And when you write your paper, make sure that you quote from the published lecture and not from the audio. Hopefully the audio will help you understand the lecture better and John Locke's reading. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.